Welcome back to Music Appreciation. Today's lesson is 4.1 Rhythm and Meter. So today we start talking about rhythm and all the things to do with rhythm for Module 4. Uh, First, let's check out a little bit of playing around with the online sequencer that you'll be using for your next assignment. And then we'll look at what we're doing today. So we're going to be having some fun with rhythm, and you'll be using the sequencer that you just saw to complete your next assignment. So it's online, it's totally free. It's at onlinesequencer.net, and you can go on our course and look at homework 3, and you can look at what I've asked you to do there. It's really open-ended. You can make whatever kind of beat you want. I just defined how long it should be, and I really just want you to play around and have fun in this assignment, and there's no verbal writing component. So as we get going into this module, we're going to start by talking about beat and tempo. Then we're going to look at rhythmic values and notation, meter, which is the same as time signature, meter demonstrations, some different types of meter, and rhythm and meter practice with the online sequencer. So I hope you enjoy today's lesson. So briefly, I wanted to just talk about what a sequencer is. So the sequencer that we're using here at onlinesequencer.net is just one of many types of sequencers, but they all do the same thing. They're a creative tool for composing loops, so repeating music that's based on a grid. So you can think of a sequencer as just a really user-friendly way to create music by clicking in boxes inside of a grid. And that works basically the same way as classical notation, but instead of adding on rhythms, we're just working with a grid of possibilities. So when you go to do this assignment, this is a sequencer. You're going to get to pick your instrument. And over here you see where to click to play which instruments. You can change the tempo up here. And you can just kind of play around with these sounds. You can change the time signature. You can change the resolution of the grid. And you can just have some fun. A sequencer by nature loops, so it'll repeat however much music you have. If you just write, for example, one measure of music, which the assignment requires you to write a little bit more than that. But if you write one measure of music, like I did here, then it will loop the one measure. If you write two measures of music, it will loop the two measures, and so on. So it's a really creative way to create music without needing to know music notation, and it's often used for creating grooves and beats with a drum machine or with a synthesizer, and it should be a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy that. So the first thing that we're going to learn about with rhythms is the beat. So when we say beat in music, what we're talking about is the constant pulse that happens at a certain tempo. So if you say that this song is at a tempo of 120, we'll talk more about that, then the tempo is assigned to this beat. So there's some kind of a beat that is just a consistent pulse going on throughout the music. So if you find that you can listen to some music and tap your hand or foot along, you've done the first step of figuring out what is going on with the rhythm, just finding the underlying beat. Let's listen a little bit here to the folk song Wild Mountain Thyme as performed by Lucy Wainwright Roche. And let's go ahead and try to tap along with the beat. So that's the basic beat that's going on. It's a rather slow beat. We'll come back to talk about what the meter is, but that's the beat. She is stretching the tempo a little bit, which is great, but that's the basic beat. So that's what we'll refer to as a beat. As you probably know, the word beat is often used as well to mean something different, which would mean like a larger composed groove. So you might hear someone say like, I really like the beat for this song, or this person composed all of the backing beats for this rapper, or something like that. So there's nothing wrong with that term, but in a musical context, when we say beat, we mean the constant pulse. And so you might refer to the all the background tracks on a song as a groove, or you can still call it a beat, but just to avoid confusion, I wanted to bring that up, that we're referring to the consistent pulse in music as the beat. So along with beat, we have two basic other concepts. One is tempo, and that is the speed of that beat. So we know that a beat can go at this speed, or it can go faster or slower. And so the tempo is how many of those per minute. So we've been talking about hertz and frequency and cycles per second. So now we're thinking of beats per minute, because of these tempos, of course, move slower than the oscillations of a waveform. So the tempo might be 60 beats per minute, which is one beat every second. Or it might be 120 beats per minute, which is 2 beats every second. So tempos range from about 40 beats per minute to about 200 beats per minute. Of course, you can go slower or faster than that, but you might get into some philosophical debate about whether what you're calling the beat is actually just the beat and not a cycle of more or less beats, or smaller or bigger rhythmic values. Um, so let's go back into online sequencer for a second. We're going to use it throughout the lesson today, just kind of get you familiar with it and hear some different tempos and beats. The other main concept that I wanted to bring up was the downbeat. The downbeat is the word for the first beat in any measure. Measure is a single cycle of a meter or one repeating group. So a measure like 4/4, 4/4 time is one. There's one measure is 4 beats. So back in the online sequencer here, we can play with the beat and the tempo, which I think is a great way to learn about these things. Just play around with trying some things. So up here at the top, we can put in a tempo of 60 beats per minute, which would mean 1 beat every second. Here we can select an instrument that's percussive, and we can put like a kick drum on all the beats of the measure. It's a little loud, but we can put this kick drum on these parts of the grid. You notice up here, this is one measure. So these darker lines here are the beats. So right now we're in 4/4. Probably doesn't really matter whether I make these long or short because they're a percussive sound, but I'll go ahead and do it like this so we can see them splitting up the measure into 4 equal parts. So again, we're going to talk in a minute more about what 4/4 is, but for now, let's just think about these as the beats, and this is the tempo of 60. So you can play around with that in your composing and just thinking about tempo. Let's go up to a really high tempo of like 160 beats per minute. So as we get to the higher tempos, we might ask ourselves, are we really hearing each of those as being a beat? And if so, it's a really fast beat. Or are we hearing those more like eighth notes, which we'll talk about, or more as subdivisions of a larger beat? So if we were to tap along with this, would we tap all of these, or would we tap 2 or 1 instead? Would we tap like this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or would we tap 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2? I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more later. It actually doesn't really matter that much whether you have 160 as a tempo like this, or whether you have 80 as a tempo and these are written in as faster notes, if that makes sense. So we're not going to worry too much about that, but I bring it up to say that, a normal tempo range is about 40 beats per minute to maybe 200 at the higher end. And of course, rhythms can be faster or slower than that, but their basic tempo would be somewhere in that range. So again, the downbeat is the first beat of each measure. So I might accent the downbeat of this measure by putting, let's say, another hit right at the beginning. So when we hear this loop, now we'll hear this bell sound at the beginning of the measure, and that'll help us hear the 4 beats as a group, a measure of 4/4. I'm going to go back down a little bit on the tempo. Let's call it 110. Okay, so yeah, you can play around with some tempos there, have some fun. The next thing that I want to talk about is the rhythmic values. So we're going to talk about how we measure the length of notes in relation to a tempo. So we're only going to do the basics of music notation in this class, but I do want you to know the very basics of identifying some classical music notation. Because in this case, we want to be able to talk about just the rhythms of notes, So we're not worried about pitch yet, but here we want to learn the basic 5 values of rhythms. So this little tree represents how a whole note can divide into all of these other notes. So these are the basic rhythmic values. A whole note fills up an entire measure. That's why it's called a whole note. At least a measure of a standard time signature of 4/4. So a whole note divides into 2 half notes. Half notes divide into 2 quarter notes, or 1/4 of a whole note. Then these are eighth notes. These little things are called flags, so that distinguishes it from a quarter note. And then finally 16th notes, which are 1/16 of a whole note, have 2 flags that distinguishes them from eighth notes. And you can have things like double whole notes and 32nd notes and 64th notes, but we don't really need to worry about that. Any basic rhythm we want to make, we can make with a combination of these notes. So if you were thinking about a standard measure in 4/4, which we'll come back to, it would have 1 whole note, or 2 half notes, or 4 quarter notes, or 8 eighth notes, or 16 16th notes. And that's where they get their names, their percentage or their fractions of a whole note. To add to that, we have dotted values. So there's these little dots that change the rhythmic value, or change the duration, we might say, of these basic notes up here. So I want you to learn that too. A dot, what it does is to take the note value and add half. So it's 1.5 times the note value that you see. So right here we see a dotted half note. That means that the length of this is a half note plus a quarter note. Here we see a dotted quarter note. That is a quarter note plus an eighth note in length. Here, a dotted eighth note is an eighth note plus a 16th note in length. So this lets us notate rhythms without having a lot of tied together notes and a lot more information than we need. This one symbol helps represent 3/4 of a whole note, you might say. So dotted half, dotted quarter, dotted eighth. It's whatever their rhythmic value is plus half, or 1.5 times the rhythmic value. Then I just wanted to make a quick note about flags and beams you'll see down here. Just to point out to you, if you're looking at notation, that these right here are eighth notes, and so are these. These are 16th notes, and so are these. So these flags, these flagged eighth notes, they mean the exact same thing as these, which are connected together instead with a flag with a beam. So you notice how the 16th notes have 2 flags or 2 beams. Here the eighth notes have 1 flag or 1 beam. And I just wanted to point that out so there's no confusion, that this actually means the same thing as this. The reason that we would have one or the other just has to do with where they show up in the measure and whether they're part of the same beat or if they're staggered over multiple beats. Also, some older notation from the Baroque era and before sometimes uses these separated notes. But these mean the same thing. So either you have a beam or 2 beams, or you have a flag or 2 flags for 8th and 16th notes. So that's all we're really covering for rhythmic notation. If this is, I know for some of you this is old hat, and for others it's new hat. If you want to do some more research into this stuff, if you feel like this is all brand new, musictheory.net has a good lesson on this stuff where it goes, just says these things a few different ways. So musictheory.net is a free resource that I would recommend if you want to check out. It's lesson 11. So let's go ahead and try some of these rhythmic values inside of the online sequencer. So we're going to stay in a time signature of 4/4, which we're coming back to in a minute, but it's the most common time signature. And what we had already here was set up kick drums that were happening every quarter note. So right now we already have something happening every quarter note. if we were to stretch out this ride bell, it only happens once, so since it's a short sound, it kind of doesn't matter whether I really drag it out, but I want to show I want to show that as our whole note. So up here we have a whole note. Down here we have quarter notes, and then we could put in some half notes, so something that happens just on beats 1 and 3 or twice for the measure. Maybe it would work better to have a crash cymbal. Yeah, that lasts a little longer. We can use this crash cymbal for our whole note instead, and we can use really whatever we want. Let's try this low tom. We'll use this low tom as our half note. Or maybe we'll move it up here. We'll do this mid tom. So that will happen every half note. So now we've got whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes. Let's hear that. Yeah, maybe it's a little hard to hear the tom. We could change that to a cymbal. So this is the kind of stuff you can be doing in your assignment, just playing around with, moving around the blocks. So maybe this ride cymbal would be a little bit easier to hear for our half note. Let's go ahead and add some eighth notes. So you can tell that the grid, we can set the grid to be a certain percentage of the beat or a fraction of the beat. Right now it's already set by default to 16th notes. So if I go to add in eighth notes, let's try this closed hi-hat here. Hi-hat is the two cymbals on a drum set that are put together, so they make this kind of short sound when you use the foot pedal to close them together. So here is some eighth note hi-hat. I'm still having a hard time hearing our half notes, so I think we need a second crash cymbal. It has a little bit of a different sound, so we'll hear our half notes come through. Okay, so we've got some eighth notes on the hi-hats, and then what if we were to put in some 16th notes, maybe on the ride cymbal? This might be a good place for the ride cymbal. Or the ride bell. Trying to find something that'll jump out of the texture a little bit. Now we can change the volumes of each of these, but I don't think we want to worry about that right now. So we have whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth notes, and 16th notes. Let's see what it sounds like. Yeah, so if we wanted to, we could include some dotted values as well, knowing that they won't necessarily line up with the end of the measure. So I'll show you what I mean. Since we've seen now all of these together, I want to get rid of the crash cymbal on the whole note and the half note because they're a little bit too much for this beat. It's kind of distracting to hear a crash on every measure. So let's go ahead and put in a dotted half note. Let's see what that would look like. So a dotted half note, here's our quarter note. It lasts for one beat. If we were to put in a dotted half note, that means a half note plus half of a half note, or plus a quarter note. So that would look like this. Maybe I will use I don't know, this tom here. So here's a half note, and here's a dotted half note. So the dotted half note already takes up 3/4 of our measure. We can't fit in another one, but I could have this one happen, and then just a quarter note, and then loop back around, or we could have it start on beat 2. Something like this. So this is still a dotted quarter note with a rest before it. If we were to put in a dotted half note, that's what this is. If we were to put in dotted quarter notes, they would be a quarter note plus an eighth note. So that would mean it's equal to 3/8 notes. So maybe I'll take this other tom here and have a low tom that lasts for a dotted quarter note. And again, I can't fit in 3 of those in the measure, so either I just put in one more quarter note here, then we'd have there we go, dotted quarter, and quarter note, or we just don't have a last beat there. So let's hear what it sounds like with just 2 dotted quarter notes. Okay, and if we wanted to, we could have a dotted eighth note. So here we see our 16th notes. Dotted eighth note is an eighth note plus a 16th note, which would also be equal to 3 16th notes. So we could have, let's say on the tambourine here, we could have something that's this length. I wonder if I can copy and paste that. Doesn't seem like I can. Nope. Not exactly what I was going for. But that's okay. Here are some dotted 16th notes, and they'll be a little interesting because they go. They also won't line up with the end of the measure, but we can fit in 4 of them here, 5 of them, and then we just have one little extra space there. So let's hear that. So if you want to, as you're composing, what you could do is start just really simple like this, just kind of have a filled up grid with a bunch of notes. Then you could just drag these around. Something that I did want to mention that is very common, sometimes it's attributed to rock music, but it's really in almost every style, which is to accent beats 2 and 4 out of the 4. So we might go, standard rock beat would go kick drum, snare drum on 2, kick drum on 3, snare drum on 4. And, maybe we would just move around some of these other things. I think the hi-hats working pretty well. I could see just getting rid of the 16th notes, or maybe keeping every other one. I kind of like the tambourine dotted eighth notes. That's sort of fun. And the low tom is fine. I think we don't need the first one, so I could just take this one. Yeah, and then you could drag these around if you wanted to. So we'll just close out this little section by moving some of these around while we listen to it. Anyway, I hope you have fun doing that, and I look forward to seeing everyone's beats. You'll be turning them in, as the assignment says, as a link to your file. So this has save with this little cloud symbol, and when you save, it just creates a link for you, and you can copy the link and you just turn in that link. So that link specifically would have your beat that you just made saved in it. So next we'll talk about meter. Meter is like 4/4 or 2/2 or 3/4 or 6/8. You also hear it referred to as time. So you might hear someone say 4/4 time. That means a 4/4 meter. And it's also the same thing as time signature. It's just there's a slight distinction where time signature is technically the notated, written out symbol of 4/4, whereas the meter is the actual thing of 4/4. So you might say we could play in 4/4 and never notate it. The second we notate it, it's called a time signature. But for our class, you can just call it either one, meter or time signature. But just know that when I say meter, that's what I'm referring to. So the meter kind of tells us a lot about the music. It tells us what the beat is. So it defines the beat, whether the beat is a quarter note or an eighth note. It tells us the groupings of the rhythms, which we'll get back into in a second. Do we have a grouping of 4 quarter notes or a grouping of 3 eighth notes? And it also tells us the length of the measure. So it tells us the measure is 6 eighth notes long or 4 quarter notes long. So the time signature or the meter is broken up into 2 parts. You see that visually here. And so the top part, or what we casually refer to as the numerator, numerator, and the bottom part is the denominator. As in from math, where we have a fraction with a numerator and a denominator. This isn't exactly a fraction, but it's very close to a fraction. 3/4 is kind of like 3/4 of a whole note. So we call them the numerator or the top number, and the denominator or the bottom number. And the top number, the numerator, refers to how many beats per measure. So in 4/4, there's 4 beats. The denominator, the bottom number, refers to what fraction of a whole note gets the beat. So in this case, it's a quarter of a whole note or a quarter note that gets the beat. So that means there's 4 quarter notes in a 4/4 measure. If we look over here at 3/4, that means it's also a quarter note that gets the beat, but there are only 3 of them in the measure. So the measure is shorter, 3 quarter notes. 6/8, we're going to talk a little bit more about in a minute, but at the simplest level, that's 6 eighth notes that makes up the measure. Here's some more examples. 3/2 is 3 beats per measure, top number, and 2 means that a half note gets the beat. So there are 3 half notes, which means that measure is actually longer than a 4/4 measure, whereas a 3/4 measure is shorter than a 4/4 measure. So very close to a fraction. 3/2 is rather rare. In fact, there are a lot of meters that are used in music, and there's a huge variety in what the meter is in music, but a fair maybe 80% of it is in, I would say, probably 3 or 4 different meters, and the rest are a little bit more rare. So now that we've talked about the meter itself, I'll just show you a couple examples. Here's from Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story. The very beginning of the music, you see 6/8. So that means there's 6/8 notes in the measure. I'm just going to scroll through and find another section. Here, we're also in 6/8. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eighth notes. If I go somewhere else, here the meter is 3/8. You can see 1, 2, 3, and these bar lines separate the measures. So a measure is just one time through the meter, and measures are also referred to as bars. That's kind of a slang term for a measure, is a bar. And the bar lines are these vertical lines that separate them. Here's some Beethoven. We can see right at the beginning that it says 3/4, so that means 3 quarter notes in the measure. You can see, for example, in this measure, 1, 2/8 notes adds up to 1, and then a quarter note, so that's 3/4. This, I forgot to mention, is what we call a pickup measure. So this is just it's not a full measure. It's a partial measure that only happens at the beginning of a piece of music. So it's a pickup. And it goes da, da. It's just the last note of a measure that we get as an anacrusis, it's called, or a pickup to the downbeat of the music. Here's one last example. This is by Louis Andriessen. This is kind of an interesting one because it does have meters. You can see them here. 2/4, 4/4. But notice the meter is changing. So we call that mixed meter. It's where you change back and forth between multiple meters. This symbol, the C, is common time. That's shorthand for 4/4. It's actually the same thing as 4/4. So yeah, those are examples of meters. We're going to hear some in a second here. But first I want to talk about the subdivision of the beat. So we have the beat, and in most cases with these meters, the top number, or the bottom number, defined what gets the beat. So for example, in 4/4, the quarter note gets the beat. But the beat is also divided itself into smaller beats. So like, for example, you see here the quarter note can divide into 1/8 notes. That's called a subdivision. So if we're in 4/4, the beat is a quarter note and the subdivision is an 1/8 note. When the beat is subdivided into 2 parts, that's called a simple meter. So that would include 4/4, 2/2, 2/4, 3/4. But when the beat is divided into 3 parts, it's called a compound meter. And this is where it just gets a little bit tricky with the symbols, but you'll see what I mean here. So these are our basic compound meters. Basically, all of the examples I gave up here are simple meters, but these 4 here are compound meters. Let me zoom in a little bit here if I can. There we go. 3/8, 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8 are all compound meters. And here's why. So if we think about 6/8, which is the most common compound meter, you see it up here. 6/8 literally means there are 6/8 notes. So there are 6 beats in the measure, and the 8th note gets the beat. But the twist is, with these, you can see they all have, they're all divisible by 3 in the numerator. And when that's the case, what we actually do is group them into 3s. So with 6/8, instead of feeling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as 6 fast notes, we instead feel them as 2 groups of 3 notes. So we hear them actually as dotted quarters. So this is where these dotted values really have their day. So in 6/8, how many dotted quarters would there be in the measure? So a dotted quarter note, let's see, is a quarter note plus an 1/8 note. So that's also like saying 3/8 notes. So then in 6/8, we would have 2 dotted quarters. So the way we would hear that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because our brain naturally divides this group of more in the numerator into larger groups. So in 12/8, it's the same type of thing, except we have 4 of those groups of 3. So we hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So those are called compound meters, which just means that their subdivision is into 3 parts, and that's usually these 4 meters. And in fact, 80 or 90% of the time, it's 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to hear an example in a minute here. But the last type of meter I wanted to mention, The compound and simple distinction refers to the subdivision of each beat. This next term refers specifically to the numerator, or the top number of the meter, and that's an asymmetrical meter. All that means is that's when we have a top number that is not divisible equally in half, or you might say it's not a power of 2. It's an odd number that's not a 3. So an asymmetrical meter would be like 5, 7, 11, 13, something like that. 5 and 7 are rare, but you do see them once in a while. For example, 7, 4. That would mean there's 7 quarter notes in the measure. It's almost twice as long as a 4/4 bar. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a long measure. Or 5/8, which is 5 beats per measure, and the eighth note gets the beat. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And since those are not divisible by 2, they can't be split in half. They're a little harder for us to feel, or a little more lopsided, so they're called asymmetrical for that reason. This is kind of a bonus piece of information for those of you who are interested, but 5/8, you could actually say it's less likely you're going to hear it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a little bit more like you'll hear it as a simple combined with a compound, where we have 2 parts to the measure and 2 beats to the measure, and one of them is a dotted quarter, like in 6/8, and one of them is a quarter, like in 2/4. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's advanced. You don't really need to know that, but that's a way that we can group kind of like a compound meter, or a combination of simple and compound, when we have an asymmetrical meter. So these are rare. I just want you to know what they are. Most of the ones we'll be practicing and thinking about are the standard simple meters, and 6/8 as a compound meter. So I wanted to just demonstrate some meters by playing some songs. The first one is Powderfinger by Neil Young. It is in 4/4. I played it as an example because even though it might be difficult to hear the basic beat at the beginning, it involves a little bit of syncopation in the strumming, which we're going to talk about next lesson. But if you were to just tap along your foot or your hand while I play, you probably would pick up the 4/4 meter, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. You'll hear like strumming patterns or other rhythms that happen underneath the basic beat. So just challenge yourself to just tap along with the basic beat and count how many there are before the repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The next one I wanted to demonstrate is from The Sound of Music. So this we would tap. So we've got the beat. That would be a quarter note beat, presumably. And if we count how many there are of those, notice the chords are changing every 3 of those hits. So that's a good clue. Chords don't always change at the beginning of a measure, but it's a good indicator they might. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So 3/4, a classic feeling for 3/4 is the waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you can think about a lot of 3/4 music feels like a waltz. So the next one I wanted to come back to was the Wild Mountain Thyme that we heard earlier. Oh, the summertime is coming. Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme blooms around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? So here we have a beat of da, 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 da. Again, there's more strumming happening than there are beats, but if you were to tap those beats, da, 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 da. We hear that there are 3 subdivisions to those beats. So each of those beats, there's 2 of those beats per measure, and each of those beats is subdivided into 3 parts. So that means this is a compound meter. It's in 6/8. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you're not going to have listening tests for this class, but I really do want you to be able to, feel this if you can. And I think the best way to practice is as you're driving around in the car or just in between classes or something. Just put on one of your favorite songs and try to start by feeling the beat, tapping along the beat. It seems easy, and it is pretty easy, but it's a good challenge to try to do this with the songs that you care about, because you might find some interesting twists along the way. Another good 6/8 example is House of the Rising Sun. There is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 1. If you end up counting one of these 6/8 songs as a fast 3/4, you might have been thinking about that. It's one of the things that I wanted to address today. So if you mistakenly are thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's really not dead wrong. It's more of a kind of subtle distinction, because the 3/4 example that I played, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. is definitely felt in groups of three as well. So, at the end of the day, professional musicians might have an argument about whether something is a fast 3/4 or whether it's in 6/8, and that's okay. It's something that the basic distinction is just that in 6/8 we really feel two groups, and we feel them. Usually, those are happening faster, and in 3/4 we feel all three of the beats. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Here it's like in Wild Mountain Time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So just know that if you're having trouble with that distinction, it's okay. A similar distinction happens between like 2/4 and 4/4, or a similar thing between, okay, is this the quarter note and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or is this the eighth note and it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So those distinctions sometimes are rather subtle, and sometimes there really is no perfect answer, so that's okay. Another example would be playing something in an asymmetrical meter, like 5/4. So this is Everything's Alright from Jesus Christ Superstar, which goes, try not to get worried, try not to turn on to problems that upset you. Oh, don't you know everything's alright? Yes, everything's fine. It took me a second to figure that out. Try not to get worried, try not to turn on to problems that upset you. Oh, don't you know everything's alright? Yes, everything's fine, and I want you to sleep well tonight. It's almost hard to tell. It's one of the reasons I like this song, is that it's kind of subtle, that it's in an asymmetrical meter. You might not even pick up at first that it's in 5, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. Try not to get worried and try not to turn on to problems that upset you. Don't you know everything's alright? Yes, everything's fine. Which has a similar feel to the famous Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, which is also in 5. It was too hard for me to put my fingers at the right time, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, again, that's not going to be tested that you're able to hear that, but I just wanted to kind of point that out. The last thing I wanted to show is an example from the Beatles, Blackbird. This song is in 4/4, basically. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, etc. And so it's basically in 4/4, but it has an interesting thing which we would call a meter change, where at the very beginning it has one measure of 3/4, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that first one is 1, 2, 3. So it's blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly, etc. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have something else called mixed meter, and that would be if you just keep going back and forth between 2 meters. In this case, it's just a meter change. It's basically a song that's in 4/4 that has an exception at the very beginning. It starts in 3/4 for just one measure. So I hope you'll go and listen to some of the songs that you love and try to zero in on the meter. And um, the basic approach would be finding the beat, so just tapping along with the beat, and finding the downbeat, so you can find the beginning of the measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then finding out what the meter is by what are we counting? Usually it's quarter notes. Once in a while it's dotted quarter notes, like in 6/8. But what are we counting? Probably quarter notes. How many of them are there? 4, 3, 5, 7, etc. So to bring it full circle here, we could come back into the online sequencer and try out some of these meters. So we tried out 4/4 already. Down here you can change the time signature, so we could go into 3/4. You notice that where the beginning of the next bar is changed. And remember, you can play around with the grid, so this is how much it's dividing each beat. So we could kind of practice hearing each of the beats this way. 8-bit drum kit. Let's try electric drum kit. Wow. Okay, I'm not sure about that. I wanted to like it, but how about drum kit? So you could play around with the 3/4 measure. 1, 2, 3, and just repeat that. Remember, you can play with your tempo. Let's say we go to a slower tempo, like 70. Maybe a little faster, like 90. You can try playing with some of the off beats in between. So there are some limitations to this program that I've noticed. Down here on time signature, you only have the options for 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, or 5/4. So if you're someone who's interested in another meter for this project, there are ways you could kind of get around this. We talked about how 6/8 is kind of like 2 beat groups. So if you wanted to have 6/8, you could divide each beat into 3 parts using the grid of 1/3. And we're going to come back to what that's related to next time, triplets. But if you wanted to just make 6/8, I just wanted to point that out for people who wanted to try that. You could go to 2/4 for the time signature and have a grid of 1/3, so that makes a compound meter dividing each beat into 3 parts. Let's get rid of some of these. So then you could have a functional 6/8 loop if you want to try that. One more note about this is that you're picking the instrument up here, and it has a lot of instruments actually. Please use percussive sounds, so some of these bottom percussion instruments for this project. But if you want to, and you will on your next homework that uses this, you could add in some other instruments on your own, and this would be... Now it's still playing drums there, but the new notes that I put in will be like on a piano, so... So you could play around with some other instruments if you want to. I wanted to point that out because sometimes when you first start using this online sequencer, you start clicking around notes, then you change the instrument, but it's hard to realize at first that it's keeping those other instruments present that you were using. So sometimes you might just have to erase some notes and go back a step. If you change the instrument, it's only changing it for what you put in new. It's not changing what you already put in. So yeah, I'm really excited about seeing your beats and seeing what you do with meter. So I hope you have some fun with this. And next time we're going to be talking about some more interesting and complex rhythmical devices like syncopation, offbeats, and tuplets. So we'll see you back for that. Enjoy the assignment. That's all for 4.1 Rhythm and Meter. I will be putting up a meter playlist on YouTube that you can listen through and figure out what the time signatures are. There's some fun ones on there, so I hope you enjoy that as well. See you back next time.